Good evening. Thanks for joining us tonight. My name is Kelly Mills and I come to you from Melton City Council. I am a Senior Sustainability Officer there. I'd like to start with a welcome to country. Tonight I'm coming to you from the lands of the Wurundjeri people, and I'd ask you to consider the lands on which you come from tonight to join us on this webinar as we pay our deepest respects to the ancestors and elders past and present who've nurtured and cared for this country for tens of thousands of years. We also pay our respects to the lands, waters, flora and fauna of this beautiful country. This evening I'm representing the Western Alliance for Greenhouse Action, affectionately known as WAGA. We're an alliance of councils across the western suburbs of Melbourne who work together on climate change action. And this presentation is a partnership with Renew, a membership-based non-profit organisation working to transform Australian homes for climate and energy resilience. Now, tonight's webinar is on electric vehicles. EVs are finally becoming more common in Australia, and this webinar gives an overview of how to integrate EV charging into your home and tips for choosing the right EV in 2024. Tonight's resident expert is Bryce Gatton, and he has been working, writing and presenting in the EV sector since 2008. Was there even EVs in 2008, Bryce?
Yep, there were. We were converting vehicles back then. Oh, sorry, we were converting vehicles.
I bet you were. You write for Australia's premier EV news site, which is the driven.io, running the EV transition support consult, EV build safety training to university race teams, so we can race EVs as well. There you go. In his spare time, Bryce writes on EV topics for Renew magazine, which is how you came to be our resident expert, and regularly presents on EV issues and the opportunities. He's the writer behind the Australian Electric Vehicle Association website and the car model fact sheets. So you're the guy, Bryce. You're the guy. You know the things about EVs. This is great.
Thank you very much, Kelly. I appreciate that very kind introduction. Yes, I've been around EVs since 2008 when I started doing conversions with a number of people out at Ceres Environment Park. In fact, I'll do a quick screen share for my presentation. So, Kelly, is that coming through quite nicely?
Yeah, it sure is. I'll leave you to it, and I'll pick you up again at the end.
Oh, fantastic, Kelly, and welcome to everyone here tonight. Yes, as Kelly's pointed out, I'm basically, these days work as a transition consultant, doing transition plans for councils, policy advice, a number of other things, and I write for The Driven and Renew magazine, as some of you may have seen my articles in Renew from time to time. Part of my background is actually as an electrical contractor as well as a teacher. So pointing out tonight, this set of slides is actually written like a set of teaching materials. So I've actually put my email address in at the very end. So if you want a copy of the slides, because there's a fair bit of information in them, it's sort of a EV 101 to begin with, and I'll go more in about charging and the cars choices and where to find more information. So yeah, feel free to email me at the end with the email address that comes up on the last slide. So tonight I'm going to cover sort of what's an EV, a bit about EV transitions and transitions in general, how EV charging works, and our Australian state of play when it comes to cars, charging and policy. And then I'm going to look at sort of choosing an EV, what's available now, where to get some sources of information, what's coming soon perhaps, if there's some vehicles that seem attractive. And then I'll come at the end with some reliable sources of information on EVs. So first up, what's an EV? I suppose that's a pretty good question to start with. Is your plug-in EVs, your BEV, the battery electric vehicle. That's pretty straightforward. It has an electric motor. As it slows down, it acts as a generator and feeds power back into the battery, hence that back and forth arrow called regenerative braking. And then the electric motor drives the car normally. The regenerative braking will give you between 5 and 20% extra distance because that's how much energy you recover through regenerative braking. It also means you don't use your brakes as much, so it means that the brake pads will wear a lot less and the disc pads will last a lot longer, which is a very nice thing with EVs. Then there's the plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. Their day was when batteries were super expensive, as I'll talk about a bit later. They started out back in 2012 at around $1,200 per kilowatt hour. They're now sneaking down towards 110. They say once they hit about $100 per kilowatt hour, this is US dollars I'm talking at the moment, that will be the break-even point with petrol cars. And as you'll see with the prices I go through tonight, they're already starting to break the $30,000 barrier. The next one along is the hybrid electric vehicle. These are the Toyota Priuses, Camrys, that type of thing. Their days are numbered now because they're using a small battery with an electric motor. And what they do is save energy through slowing down and put that back into the battery, and then will save you between 5 and 20% of petrol, strangely enough. That's that same 5 and 20% of energy saving that they do when they're braking. So at least they do save some of the brakes. And therefore taxis love them because they save between 5 and 20% of the fuel, and they save in brake wear, and they have been somewhat cheaper than EVs, but that's getting closer and closer to the break-even point already. And then last on the list is the hydrogen car, better known as the fuel cell electric vehicle, FCEV, better known as the hydrogen car. That is refueled using hydrogen, converts hydrogen to a water, basically, and electricity, which drives the electric motor. Because you can't regenerate hydrogen as you slow down, they still have a battery, a smaller battery, and then they will drive through electricity as per an all EV. So that's pretty much how they work. They are still an EV, they just get their electricity a slightly different way. However, I'll be talking tonight mainly about the plug-in electric vehicles because they're the ones that you want to charge. The hybrids, by the way, and in particular, I'll be talking about the battery electric vehicles. They need the main sort of charging. As I point out for the plug-in hybrids, a power point is probably all you'll ever need for one of those. What I'll also point out, though, is the electric vehicle, when the bans come about overseas, when, say, Norway, for instance, next year will stop allowing sales of petrol passenger cars, petrol and diesel passenger cars, and like commercials. And the electric vehicle is included in that ban because they don't have a plug. They're counted as a petrol car. The next one along that's going to disappear, and I'll explain why a bit later, is the hydrogen car. As I'll explain a bit later, it's basically a zombie, a dead man walking, and the numbers basically don't lie on that one. So that's pretty much what we'll be talking about tonight. And what also is happening in the more mature markets overseas is the plug-in hybrid is starting to fade away. In Norway, they were looking like half of plug-in vehicle sales a couple of years ago, 3-4 years ago. They're now down to 7%, which seems like a reasonable number, except 94% of all vehicles sold there now have a plug. So 85% of all plug-in vehicles are the full battery there now, and the plug-in hybrid is fading out there too. I also like to put this slide in saying battery electric vehicles are not a new thing. They were around the turn of last century. Roughly a third of all cars sold, in fact, were electric in those days. But those days you could only get electricity in the biggest central business districts of the world, and everywhere else, well, it was very hard to cart a can of electrons, whereas you could cart a can or drum of 44-gallon drum of petrol. So petrol car won out in those days, and pretty obviously why. These days, there's power points everywhere. The electricity grid is pretty much ubiquitous. And as I point out a bit later with the hydrogen car, there's about 8 refueling points in Australia, of which I think 1 or 2 are publicly available. So the hydrogen car is pretty much where the battery vehicle was 120 odd years ago. However, I'm always talking about cars, and that's mainly the thing we're talking about tonight, but the transition is coming in all forms. We're giving up fossil fuels pretty much in everything. So if it moves and runs on fossil fuel, it's changing to electric. So trucks, yeah, those two there. The Tesla truck is been selling in the US at the moment. There's actually a Chinese, dare I say, knockoff, although they get a bit grumpy if I say that. It looks identical with slightly different dimensions, and they are likely to start arriving in Australia in the next year or two. I believe they're arriving in New Zealand now. The lower one is the Scania truck. I've actually driven the 300-kilometre range and the 500-kilometre range. The something 600 is called, is actually going into production as of this week in England, I believe. Electric machinery is actually a thing, a lot less pollution, a lot quieter, a lot safer, basically running underground and carting all those flammable liquids. And even electric bobcat was shown a couple of years ago hopefully for sale next year sometime. Electric tractors, yes, they are a thing, and they're coming to Australia in 2026, I believe. Who hasn't tried to be run over by an electric Deliveroo? Electric bicycles are all the rage at the moment, and as I'll talk about a bit later, be careful where you buy them. They've got to be a quality product with a quality battery and battery charger, or they may go up in flames, unlike electric vehicles, as I'll point out a bit later. Motorbikes, yes, that is the Harley-Davidson Livewire. They actually do make electric motorcycles, and Harley-Davidson are one of the first to bring them in, although there's more available than that. I've quickly overslipped into those planes. Yes, that one on the blue sky is a flight trainer. Will fly slightly over an hour, and there's a small fleet of them as flight trainers here in Melbourne, I believe. And the beauty of them is they can fly in and out of a local airfield, like Moorabbin, and they're not going to annoy everybody by the noise. That other one there is called the Alice. It's a 9-seater, 2-pilot aircraft, and it's currently going through flight trials for registration to sell in America. Flying cars, that's called Black Fly. That is actually registered for sale in America now. If you want to look it up and watch how it works, you can look up Black Fly on the web. At the moment, it has a single-person pilot, but ultimately they envisage it being a autonomous vehicle that will just land next to you, because it's vertical takeoff and landing, and then it'll convert to a plane. And if some of you went to the EV shows recently, you'll have seen the Zika similar type thing with 4 rotors as a 2-person flying car. That is a vehicle that's in the future that will become autonomous. You just jump in and get picked up at the bus stop or at the tram stop, and it'll take you to your destination. That was actually built here in Croydon, Victoria. It's currently overseas on trials. It has pedals and a steering wheel, but the long-term aim with that is a fully autonomous thing, with even different bodies on it, so that it'll have deliver packages, for instance, and just pop out, punch a code in, and it'll spit your package out for you. Electric buses, we'll have all probably seen a few of them driving around Melbourne now, and there's one big city in China that changed all of its 10,000 buses over to electric, and electric didn't bring the grid down, and they are much quieter, much smoother, and use a whole lot less, or require a whole lot less maintenance too, and there's a number of bus depots converting now to electric. Ferries, yes, there is actually, that one's called the Ampere. I always forget how many vehicles. There's quite a number of vehicles and passengers. There's one, however, being built here in Australia, down at Tasmania, that has got, I think, 600 passengers and several hundred cars, and is going over to Brazil fully electric. General equipment councils love these because they'll run all day and basically recharge on a 10 or 15 amp power point overnight. And again, keep the locals happy because they don't make too much noise. And believe it or not, the last one there is a boat that's actually built by Maserati. That is a Maserati, quite a beautiful looking launch. It might unload your wallet by a fair amount to buy one, but they are quite happy to provide one if you've got the dollars. Of course, we're about addition here, and yeah, we've seen a few before. We've seen, in this case, this was 1900 versus 1913 in New York, Fifth Avenue. You see that first circle, it's a famous fair of photos. I've listed the sources there. One horseless carriage and all the rest with horses in 1900. And in 1913, you'll just see the swish of a horse's tail there, and everything else is a horseless carriage, a petrol car. And sorry, I should say a third of those would have been petrol and a third of those would have been electric, and roughly a third of them would have been steam. As I said, transitions have happened. We've seen a number of them, depending on your age. The smartphone, we saw that come in. Washing machines for some older people, computers even through the 80s and 90s, air conditioning. All of these things follow a pretty traditional curve. They start off slowly, go up exponentially, and then taper off at the end. And that is Australia's uptake curve. And there's a little bit of a wobble in 2023 at the moment, but I think we're looking at roughly 10% by the end of the year, so we're still going up. But it's slowed down because people are actually rather smart, going, cars, EVs will be cheaper than they are. And as I'll point out, they are getting a lot cheaper in the next year or so. So there's probably a whole lot of very canny buyers waiting around for the cheaper ones that we know are very close on the horizon. I do like to put this thing in. EVs, as I'll point out later, are very, very unlikely to catch fire. If you don't buy a quality batteried electric bike or scooter, this is what can happen. E-bikes, I can and do, and there have been a number of deaths. So if you're buying one of these, make sure it's a known brand with Australian compliance marks. Always use the charger that came with it. If the plug fits, it doesn't mean it's compatible. It's really annoying fact of life, but yes, make sure it is the one that came with it. And charge it maybe on a hard surface, a concrete floor, rather than on a combustible floor perhaps. But that's the sort of thing to watch out for. And once it's fully charged, they haven't got as good a battery management system as EVs do. So once it's fully charged, disconnect it at reasonable, within reason. Don't just leave it on there for days and days. And that's it's actually a poster that's put out by New South Wales on e-bike safety. EVSE, another bit of acronyms going. Electric Vehicle Supply Equipment. It's your car charger, and there's 3 different types. There's your plug-in ones. They're AC. They plug into your power point. The top one there often comes with the car itself. Many cars come with them. A few people are now starting to go, oh, we can save some money. We won't put one in. I'm thinking anyone like Tesla. They don't do. They used to provide them. No, they don't. And there's one or two other brands starting to do that now. That bottom one there, by the way, is a 3-phase 32 amp plug on it, and it will provide power anything up to 32 amps 3-phase, depending on the charger built into your car. And that one's basically your jerry can in the boot when you're going off the beaten fast charger track. Very rarely that anybody will need that, as I'll show later. The fast chargers are rolling out pretty quickly now. The next layer up is your dedicated charger that's bolted to a wall. The one on what would be your left, the green and white one there, is called a BYO lead charger, because you're being your own lead. You look after your lead and then unplug it and take away. And the councils and what have you, the public chargers, don't have to look after the lead. I've seen some early ones that had leads attached, and they get very badly damaged, a bit like an air hose on a petrol station. They end up getting quite battered and run over. For home use, though, that second one there, the tethered lead, because the lead is tethered to the charger, is what I recommend. So you just unplug and wrap it around the charger and off you go. Now, the annoying part with a BYO lead charger at home is then what do you do with the lead when you finish charging? If it's been raining, you've got to dry it off, you've got to store it, whatever. I always say get a tethered lead so it can't get pinched, and just leave it curled up on the charger. The next layer up again is, as I mentioned a bit earlier, the DC fast chargers. These can charge at something like 200 times faster than the plug-in one over the far side there, 150 times, I should say. You'll see those starting to pop up around roadhouses between intercity runs, or even around here in Victoria, all around the place. The last time the first time I did a run around Victoria was in 2019, in what was in my new Honda electric Kona, and there were basically 3 DC fast chargers, 2 of which were in Melbourne and 1 was in Albury, so it wasn't really in Australia, in Victoria. So I drove around Victoria, did 2,400 Ks in 7 days, and I didn't use DC fast chargers, which you can do. It's quite comfortable. But these days, when I was doing the Charging the Regions prospecting trip for the next round of chargers, DC fast chargers to go in regional Victoria, I pretty much could stop anywhere and charge quite easily. But more chargers, the better. So there will be another round of chargers going in soon. A lot of people keep asking me, but shouldn't I wait till the plugs are sorted? Well, back in 2017-18 here in Australia, it was sorted. It's that pair there. The top part of that system there this is called a CCS2, Combined Charging System Type 2. The top one is your AC plug, and all EVs brought into Australia now, except for the aging Nissan Leaf and the old Lexus 300e, come with it. The new Lexus comes with the CCS2 now, and the Nissan Ariya, when it arrives, it's been promised for about 2 years now, should arrive next year with any luck, will come with the CCS2 as well. But the Nissan Leaf and that Lexus, I pointed out, have that combination in Australia if they're an Australian imported version. So the AC plug is always the same. So your portable chargers and your home chargers and your public AC chargers all use the same plug now. And those 2 cars do use the bigger separate DC socket. They will go a lot faster, but the plugs for those are actually rapidly disappearing, surprisingly faster than I was expecting. So there used to be quite a lot of them on the DC fast chargers. The CHAdeMO plug is now disappearing quite quickly because they're finding it's less than 1 or 2% of all charging events at CHAdeMO, because most of the CHAdeMO DC socket cars are fairly short range vehicles, so people tend not to go Melbourne to Sydney or Perth in them. So they're generally not worrying about the CHAdeMO plugs. The pair there, if you buy an imported Japanese car or the older pre-2017, so 2017 or earlier car, will come with that pair. For the AC plug, it's just an adapter, about $150, $200 for an adapter. And as I said, it comes with the old CHAdeMO system. In America, they use a peculiar electricity system that is two-phase, not three-phase. You'll notice the number of pins there. That's a three-phase plug. They have two-phase or single-phase of 120, 240 volts. So their plug system is that. In fact, last year there were originally two systems. Everybody jumped on board the Tesla system now. So Tesla used that plug in North America, and Tesla use the CCS2 everywhere else. So all Teslas coming here, the Model 3 and Model Y and anything else in the future will all be CCS2. Coming trend, people always ask me, when can I use my car to provide power to the house or to my campsite instead of just plugging it in and pulling power into it? Well, that's called V2X, or vehicle to something. And there are three layers to this. First layer is vehicle to load. And for the CCS system, they're just developing it now. Well, in fact, they've developed it, and a lot of cars are starting to arrive with it. But they learned their lesson, because that little picture in the bottom corner of the images there is the old CHAdeMO system, where it took power out of the DC socket, and they had that as a nice $10,000 box to convert it from DC to AC in order to power your anything with electric kettle up to there, a jackhammer. Not very portable or convenient, and also very expensive. The CCS system just plugs into your AC socket. A lot of cars come with it. The BYDs come actually with that, and a little Powerball with 2 3-pin plug sockets. The Hyundai system, which is shown there, they used to throw them in. I think they still do with some models, or you buy it for about $200. Those two systems, as I said, the CCS have learnt and do it through the AC side, and there's a charger in the car for AC, and that converts it to DC inside the car. So I just make it reversible. So if you plug that adapter in, it just reverses and will pull out power. And in the case of the Hyundais, it'll be about 15 amps. In case of the BYDs, it's about, about 8, 9 amps. So about 2,000, 2,200 watts versus 3,600 watts for the Hyundais. The next layer up is vehicle to home or vehicle to building, where you put a box on the wall and power comes out of the car, and the house will change over to basically turn off the grid supply, change over to the car, and provide power. So there'll be a little gap, maybe a second or so, where the house switches off and switches on again, and the car will provide power to the building. And in reverse, to get back onto the grid, it switches off, disconnects the car, and then connects to the grid. At the moment, the next layer up is vehicle to grid, where it's basically only a software difference, where that box on the wall will seamlessly integrate to the grid and will let you provide power out through the grid, so you can use it like a battery system. And that has just been announced as allowed. The standard has changed. So vehicle to grid, although more likely vehicle to home will come in the next few months, vehicle to grid, they're still haggling over the exact communication standards. So I'd say by late next year, you better do vehicle to grid or vehicle to home, maybe December, January. It'll be that quick, although it will be early adopter prices as per usual, like the first flat screen TVs that turned up in Australia. I remember seeing them in JB Hi-Fi for about $36,000 now. $500 for a better box. And those two are done via the DC side, although interestingly, Renault are announcing have announced a car that's coming out next month in Europe that does it through the AC side. So there might be a bit of a VHS beta battle coming up on that vehicle to home and vehicle to grid. I think I've just done a few notes there. I've talked about all that. Next bit of information will be refueling. We're used to that. We drive, and within our trip somewhere, we'll and do a refill of the car, and then we head off our merry way again. So it's always built into our trip to spend some time refueling. This is the new model. Our destination is your refueling point. So if your destination is somewhere that you're going to do something, how long it takes to refuel is almost irrelevant, because at home, I always say it takes me 30 seconds to recharge, even if it's an overnight charge, because I get home, plug in, 10, 15 seconds, and then the same in the morning when I unplug and I've got my full charge. And it can be the same thing for your library, your shops, park. You can do AC charging all over the place at these points already now. And you can also do DC charging. Melbourne to Sydney runs that type of thing, and I'll talk about the speeds of those types of chargers in a moment. And this is part of it. How fast do you need when you're putting some sort of charging in at home? Well, if you're doing less than 100 Ks a day, a PowerPoint will pretty much serve all you need. About 8 amps, 2 kilowatts will have you charge in less than 8 hours. And I think I've got on the next slide actually a list of just sort of a memory jogger. You could chuck it in the glove box if you wanted to. The next slide will actually put in more numbers, put a little table. And they're about $500 up installed. It's a bit like how long is a piece of string on the installation, but if you put it next to the switchboard, bit of conduit, it's basically installed. But if it's a car charging, it really should go back to the switchboard on its own circuit. It's just safer that way. And please don't use extension leads with portable chargers. This is what happened with one charging event with the BMW i3. Basically got a bit warm on his previous charge, and he went, "Oh, it'll be right," and it cooked on the next one. If you're going to use an extension lead, use something with the right size conductors, so to be rated for 10, 15 amps, and preferably industrial connectors that screw together. If you're going to use within the range of a car, so the Kona is 400 plus Ks, I'll get 500 comfortably around town, put in a dedicated charger. That'll get me 0 to 100%, which I never do. I might generally charge 30 to 80%, so 50%. 9 hours would be a full charge. 4.5 would be my 50% charge. And about $1,500 up installed, depending on how many bells and whistles the charger has. And this is that table I was referring to, and that QR code there will take you to an article on the Driven for a fuller explanation. But it's pretty much the plug-in ones, the ones that come with the car, are somewhere around 1.8 kilowatts, and you'll get 12 kilometres charged an hour. So as I said, if you do 100 Ks a day, 8 hours, 12 8s, 96. So yeah, there's your 8 hours charge. If you've got a 15 amp power point, you're 24 to double that. About 4 hours would get you 100 back. If you're home chargers, most houses are single phase, so you'll get 48, between 45 and 50 kilometres charged an hour, and that's on a single phase. If you happen to have the 3-phase fitted, then you can get 11 or 22 kilowatt chargers. The point, though, with those 11 and 22 is most EVs on the market now have a built-in charger to do up to 11 kilowatts 3-phase. There are about 4 that don't now. A lot of older cars are 7.4, but a few are starting to come into 22. But your car has to be able to take 11 or 22 to make use of that 3-phase charger. If you've got a Kona like mine and put in a 3-phase charger, it's pretty pointless because it'll only ever draw off 7.4 kilowatts on a single phase. On the other side there is your DC fast chargers. The first one at the top that's orange, they were the sort of the early rounder of 50 kilowatts, and you get 20 minutes for 100 Ks. Most cars, though, are now 150 kilowatt charging, so you'll get 6 minutes for 100 Ks. Some of the newer cars coming out, Porsche and a few others, are 350. Hyundais are around 220, 230. Teslas are 230, 250. You're getting down 5 minutes or less for 100 Ks. So you're barely getting enough time to pop in for a coffee and a toilet stop on a roadhouse now. I also point out, as part of the electrician's course that I was part of writing on EV charging, is that I always recommend that if an electrician is analysing your needs, if you're doing more than 4 hours of charging at a time, more than twice a week, suggest going up a size in charging. So if you're going to do 8 hours on a power point every 2 or 3 times a week, maybe look at a 15 amp power point instead. If you're doing that on 15 amp power point, look at the 7.4 kilowatt home wall charger. Also, the wall chargers do have lots more functions, and we'll have a lot more soon, as I'll talk about a bit later. Question I often get asked is, how far can I go on a charge? There are varying systems around the world for estimating. They're actually government mandated test standards, test cycles, and there are basically 3 of them. NEDC is the old European standard that got pretty much gamed by the manufacturers. They worked out it was also a very theoretical thing, and they basically gamed it to come up with numbers. My Kona there, which they say 557 kilometres on NEDC, I would never get that in the pink fit. However, around town, I would get 480 to 500 comfortably. So WLTP is a good number. That's the new European standard, came in 2017. By the way, I generally say, even though NEDC has a new something, can't remember exact, but I think not even darn close is the best way to describe that one. But WLTP is a very good number to use if you're doing mostly suburban and a little bit of outer suburban driving. In America, they obviously do longer distances and higher speeds, so they have the US EPA standard, and that's basically sort of middle outer suburban. If you're doing regional driving, etc., I would comfortably get around 415, 420 Ks on the highway if I'm going Melbourne to Sydney. So they're the sort of three numbers. So check the standards you're using. If you're comparing two cars, WLTP to WLTP or any DC to any DC, that's fine. That gives you an indication of the relative merits, which one will go further. But if you want a realistic number, look at the type of driving you do and pick one of WLTP or US EPA. Thankfully, unthankfully at the moment, Australia is still running on NEDC, ADR 8102. We will be changing to that changing to WLTP late next year. So most cars sold on the market here are rated to WLTP. The manufacturers will give you that number. One or two of them will tend to show you the NEDC number up front, and then in the smaller writing, WLTP. BYD have a bit of a bad habit of that, but they're getting better. So just check to make sure it is a ADR 8102, which is NEDC, or WLTP number before you say, yes, I'm going to get that or not. And there's an e-renew article, or the same articles reproduced at my website if you haven't got it. Although I would highly recommend subscribing to Renew and get all the regular updates on EVs there, as well as all the other interesting information you get. Excellent magazine. It does an EV go the distance. That's me on my way to Perth a couple of years ago. And yes, they do. That map there I'm showing you, if you look up plugshare.com, that will list all the chargers available, 11 different sorts. I've just got it listing 2. Orange dots are DC fast chargers, and green dots are AC wall-mounted chargers. If you list all the rest of them, there's even more dots, but I thought that will give you the sort of chargers that you would want to use. And then if you're looking around in the local areas, you can click on these things and it will give you all the details of that charger. In the off the beaten track, that's where I was using my portable charger. If you could see my mouse, I'm not sure if you can, but on the right-hand side, it's plugged into a 3-phase outlet. Thankfully, now there are DC chargers across the Nullarbor, so I don't need to do that anymore. And that's only in just over 2 years. The network has extended across the Nullarbor now. In the future, your home charging is pretty much where you do 80 to 90% of your charging. I think the stats are 70 to 90% these days. Workplace charging or that type of thing. In France, they actually say all car parks with something like 90 car spots or more must have solar roofs and EV charging. That's just a recent law there. There's the EV hub in Adelaide and a number of different EVs that were there when I was on my way over to Perth. There's also the private networks like Tesla, although they're, as I said, they actually use the same plug as everybody else now. So they're actually opening up, and just over 50% of Tesla chargers can be used by everybody. They're opening up their network. Ultimately, they will all be able to be used by any EV, not just Teslas. And then there's a public charging network, the NRMA, which is now part of the ChargeFox network, and then there's the ChargeFox and EVs as well. Jolt's another one, and that one at the bottom there is Barnawartha North, just south of the border on the way to Sydney. By the way, people keep talking about, or some of the trolls in the world will talk about queues at chargers. I have yet to actually have more than wait 5 minutes or so at a charger, and it's only happened, I think, twice to me in the whole time, one of which was a long weekend. Finding local charging stations, as I said, PlugShare is your general guide. Then you go to the providers themselves. So I've got them listed there. ChargeFox, EV are the two new players on the block. Ampol, in other words, BP themselves. And there's a couple of others around as well. You can search them, or if you look at the PlugShare and click on the station, it'll tell you what app you'll need. At the moment, they all have their own individual apps. They also have swipe cards, which are RFID cards, which are very handy. Or as EV now has plug and charge. Auto charge. Plug and charge is a slightly different system. The auto charge means I've registered through the app once, and then all I do now is pull up the charger, plug it in, and it just does it all. It is wonderful. My hat off to EV. It will only be a matter of time before the others do it. Some have credit card readers, and that's another way to do it. It will slowly get more seamless. It is still slightly early days in terms of the systems, and they do like to lock you into their system, so they were doing the apps. But as I said, it's becoming more seamless overseas. In England, for instance, they've actually brought in a law that says one app must be able to do all. So if you have any one of those apps, they must be able to cross or be portable across also. If I use the ChargeFox app on an EV car or an EV charger, it will work overseas. In England, for instance, it's mandated. And all DC fast chargers over there must also have credit cards. So if you don't want to use an app, don't want to log in, you just swipe your card. A little bit on policy and uptake. I always say there's carrots and there's sticks and there's policy. And that's sort of how the world is changing in terms of trying to get cleaner, less polluting vehicles and less carbon emissions around the world. There is a big stick. The various places have said, well, we're just not going to allow you to buy a new one anymore. Norway, for instance, is next year, and they've hit 94% plug-in vehicles now. And there's other dates slowly coming in. There's been a little bit of wobbling at the moment because there's a bit of toing and froing about it. I don't want to be seen to be getting too far ahead of the curve, but that's pretty much settled for those numbers. And Europe has said 2025, and there's still a bit of pushback from the manufacturers, but I think it's going to stick. It'll only slip a year or two, if at all. The manufacturers, having seen that date, have gone, well, we see the writing on the wall. And these manufacturers have all said this is roughly the dates that they will just cease building petrol, diesel vehicles. Volvo, by the way, in 18 months, 2 years' time, will be selling only electrics here. And in 2030, they'll be selling only electrics overseas. So some numbers there. Now we're going to look at what sort of EVs can you buy. Leap Motor C10 has just arrived, and they're getting cheaper. That's a sort of a medium-large SUV. There's some quite cheap ones coming around. The MG4 and the MG ZS, for instance, were both lurking around the 30 grand number with some really good discounting lately. Jeep has just brought in their first EV, and that will be, there's a couple of test cars around at the moment, and they will be, basically you could order one now to take a December delivery. MG, the Cyberster, is also the same, the first convertible. Toyota and Subaru, yes, they have actually got EVs. They're their first dipping of their toe in the water. Like every manufacturer, their first EVs okay, but I might wait till their next one. They've got a few little gremlins that just haven't built EVs before, so they're working it out. Toyota doing a very good job of trying to do it slowly, but we shall see what happens there. VW will be arriving en masse within the next few months. Now with the new VW Combi, the ID Buzz, and the ID4, and the ID7 is also arriving. EV5, I actually know some friends who've just actually ordered one and are taking delivery, I believe, next month. And the EV3 will be arriving the first quarter of next year. As I mentioned, the Nissan Ariya, which is the successor to the Leaf, has been for sale overseas for several years now, and it just keeps being delayed and delayed for Australia. So much the same as what happened with the Leaf, I suppose. But that's the sort of numbers and cars, and there's lots more, and I'll show you where you can keep track of what's coming into the future soon. And there's a whole lot of utes. LDV e-Terron 9 is probably the most interesting. It's just been announced in the last 2 weeks. That will have a really good range, 3.5 tonne towing capacity, but there's a number of others coming next year. And as I mentioned before, that is the break-even point, that roughly $100 US, and we're getting very close. I think 2024 is down to somewhere in the 100 teens. Costing to run one. Well, I'm using WLTP numbers. If anybody's read The Driven, I was using the NEDC numbers comparing a 2-litre Kona, because I was trying to make the point of the Australian standards are still way off, but it's still, the numbers come out much the same. So the Kona, 14.7 WLTP kilowatt hours per 100 kilometres. A Kona petrol, your cost comparisons pretty much, if you're just running off-peak tariffs, you're not running off your own solar, you're not using the super EV off-peak, so you can get super EV is 4-point-something cents. If you're running off your own foregone feed-in tariff, you're giving up 3.3 cents, so whatever that is, you're getting down to about $40 per 10,000 K, so it's a huge saving. Services, I'm not quite sure what they service, but they do like to charge for them. I suppose they've got to make some money somehow. So you're going to save about $1,000 a year for every 10,000 Ks used, let alone sort of the quietness and the lack of pollution around the suburbs, as well as improving the carbon dioxide emissions. I like to do a bit of EV myth busting at this point. So, first one, as I said, people are going, oh, but the petrol stations haven't got chargers yet. Well, as I pointed out earlier, we don't actually stop and refuel anymore. Most of our charging, as I said, probably 90% plus of charging is done at the destination. So I keep pointing out 90% of petrol stations better get nervous, especially the round town ones, because their business case is about to disappear. We're used to that. That's what we're going to do. That's what's going to happen. So the round town ones, the big roadhouse ones between interstate or intrastate will actually expand a little bit because people might spend an extra couple of minutes, maybe an extra cup of coffee or something. But they might spend probably 5 minutes at most more, given the speed of the charging of the later models. Oh yes, this one's a good one. EVs. This has been catching hold all around the place. Everyone keeps asking, oh, but I can't buy one, they catch fire. Completely ignoring the facts, which are a big insurance company in the US recently did a study and said out of every 100,000 vehicles sold, 100,000 hybrids, around 3,500 catch fire. Around 1,500 petrol vehicles, and the enormous number of 25 electric catch fire. So if you're going to get worried about cars catching fire and avoiding cars that catch fire, don't buy a hybrid. I don't think Toyota want me to say that, so you didn't hear it from me. But yes, that's what happens. And up until a few months ago, Nissan actually said after 13 years they'd never had one go up in flames. There might have been one recently, and they've sold probably like 800,000 of the things now. So I'm guessing that they don't catch fire much often. As I said, the fuel cell EV, here's some numbers for you to explain why they are a zombie, the dead person walking. If you have 100 kilowatt hours of renewable energy, you will get 69 kilowatt hours of 100 kilowatt hours of renewable energy, you'll get 69 kilowatt hours of actual movement. So 69% is pretty much the way to look at it. If you're doing hydrogen, so you need electricity to convert basically water to hydrogen to be green energy, green electricity, and use it through splitting water. If you just compress it, so your charging refueling point is actually right next to where the hydrolyzers, then it's about 23%. So that's what, 3 times or 1/3 the 3 times the amount of energy required. And if you're going to liquefy it and can move it to a refueling station a fair way away from the hydrolyzer, you're looking at 19 kilowatts or 19%. So what's that, about nearly 4 times? Yes, and the physics of trying to split water, there's a certain amount of energy needed with that bond. So I haven't yet found a better way of explaining it than this particular paper, which is getting a bit older, but the physics still haven't changed, I think, between now and the Big Bang. Are they more polluting than cars? Well, using the national greenhouse accounting factors and doing the accounting as per the standard international model, if you drive a current Corolla, that'll put out in 10,000 kilometres roughly 1.5 tonnes of CO2 equivalent. In every state of Australia now, just running on the grid, you will do better. Even in Victoria with our lovely brown coal, we do 1.41. And if you use solar, subscribe to green energy, especially your own solar panels, it's going to be way less. In Tasmania, 0.23, so that's 1/6. Getting a bit late for me to do maths in my head. Roughly 1/6 the amount of carbon dioxide equivalents. And it varies between the states. South Australia, with its really good mix, is around 1/3. There is an article in Renew. I do this analysis about every 5 years. I first did it in 2012, then in 2017, and again in 2022. So it's 2026, 27, I'll probably do it again. And it's been interesting to watch the various states improve each from year to year. EV life cycle, supposedly they have so much energy going into the battery that they never recover it. Well, a uni concerned scientist in America said 6 to 16 months driving will pay back the manufacturing emissions. In Europe, because they don't do quite as many Ks, roughly 2 years. And some of the manufacturers, such as Volvo and Polestar, both related companies, they say they are using green energy in their manufacturing and supply chains, which means there will be zero carbon debt from the factory gate. Everyone's starting to get worried about, if we all plug in at the same time, well, they'll bring down the grid. Well, basically, as I'll explain next, they don't add an enormous amount to demands of the grid. They say roughly 10% of total electricity needs, but they are a discretionary load. You don't have to plug in when electricity is most expensive, unlike when you need to run an air conditioner. And several supply authorities around the world have actually said they're quite ready. UK, for instance, went, yeah, we could do it now. What's the problem? But the demand needs to be managed, and that's what there needs to be coming. As I said, the hydrogen economy is using 3 to 4 times as much electricity. That could start causing a problem. As I said, they're a discretionary load. People generally like to save money when they're charging cars, so they will, in fact, plug in when it's cheapest. As I said, you can get with some plans, a super EV off-peak tariff of around 4 cents, 4.9 cents a kilowatt hour, as opposed to 20 or even 50 cents, 20 off-peak or 50 in the real peak times. This is one of my favourites. EVs are made by children. Polluting minerals mined by children. Now, it's not an EV-only issue. It's to some degree it's a Congo issue. Their labour practices leave a fair bit to be desired, and cobalt is the main problem. Manufacturers are now working hard to source ethical cobalt, but it does make up less than 10% of a battery. It's not a huge amount, and it's actually being phased out of batteries. The 2 different main chemistries are what's called LFP, lithium iron phosphate, or NMC, nickel metal cobalt. That NMC battery does have some cobalt, although it's reducing, and LFP batteries have none. So if it really worries you, maybe get an LFP battery. Although if you read my article in The Driven recently, I will have pointed out that horses for courses, there's no great advantage of one over the other. But if this does worry you, maybe get an LFP battery. Some people say, it's really expensive to put in the charging, you don't want to go there. Well, as I mentioned earlier, there's a course for electricians now, and the basics are, and this is basically what it is part of designing the system. But if you're future-proofing and you're talking to an electrician, smart chargers that can talk to the grid and turn on and off, or some of them will be vehicle-to-grid type ones as well. You could do quite well with them. Your vehicle to load, vehicle to grid, vehicle to home. Put in a cable for 32 amps, even if you're putting a 10 or 15 amp outlet on it. So it's a 6 or 10 square millimeter cable instead of a 2.5 for those electricians that might be listening tonight. Run data cables so they can talk to each other. A lot of them will be wireless, but just throw it in. It's only $10 worth of data cable at most. If you're putting a new house, probably a data hub. OCPP is Open Charge Point Protocol, 2.0.1 or above language. They will be able to do smart charging stuff. I really should have updated that. The chargers are not currently available, but with the change in standards, the European ones will be deemed to comply, so they're already starting to be offered. Other transition practicalities, of course, are if you've got a switchboard like that, if there's an electrician watching, they're probably cringing at this moment because there's the old grey federal switchboard. It's not the EV's fault, but you do need a new switchboard. So when charging off the street, there are on-street options, and I can go into more detail in them some other time, but there's not really enough time tonight to do that. Choosing your own electricity tariff with all the changes that have come in the past and coming, make sure you're on the right one, or it can get expensive, or it can be super cheap. As I said, smart or dumb charges. There's a whole article on that. I won't go into that tonight. I do a whole talk on that one alone. As I said, BYO lead charges, about $250 for one of those. If you do go off the beaten DC fast charger track, the third Leyland brother, one of those is handy, but it's probably 99% of you don't need one. And those articles are available on my website. EV information, if you want to track down information on the cars themselves, there is a summary page of all the cars that are available on the market in Australia with all the details from their range, size, battery sizes, charging rates, whether they have a tow rating, and the on-the-road in Victoria price is on the right-hand side. And there's one for soon-to-arrive cars, and for each one of those that's on the market, there is actually a double-page fact sheet covering all the same heading, so you can do a direct comparison between the cars. And there's also one for second-hand vehicles now. And it's also a separate one again for like commercial vehicles. But recently I started the second-hand one. And when the car goes to second-hand, the template changes to give you details on what to look for in buying a second-hand car. If you want to find out more, Australian organisation, obviously Renew, very worthwhile joining and getting their magazines, both Renew magazine itself and Sanctuary, which is on house designs and a number of other details there. And I won't go through what I've been doing recently. Australian Electric Vehicle Association, which I'm a member, they have a really good forum, discussion forum. It's free to join. It's not very expensive to join the AVA at the best of times, but if you just want to join the forum, there's a really good source of information, a really good brains trust there. Some Australian websites, Driven, who I write for, is probably the major one for Australian EV news. The EV Council, as they put on the front of their website, representing the electric vehicle industry. So yes, they do tend to give you the industry side of things, but they do have some very good stuff. So don't take me too wrong. They just maybe take some of their stuff with a grain of salt, because it's what the big end of town wants you to hear. And there's my own website and the work that I do. But if you click on the EV information, the Renew articles, for those who haven't got them, all a bit hard to find them off out of your pile of them sitting on a bookshelf, then click there. They'll be actually reproduced there. I'll sign off at that point and leave that one up. It's evnews@bigpond.com if you want to send for this set of slides, and I'll send them through to you as a PDF with sort of a notes page attached. Hopefully that's helped. I'll stop sharing at this point, although I might give it a couple more seconds. Or somebody might pop that up in the chat for evnews@bigpond.com if you want to send me an email for the slides.
Wow. Thanks, Bryce. That was a lot. I can't see any unanswered questions in the chat, so I'll give people a couple of seconds to think about it. And in the meantime, I have two questions. I wasn't going to ask any questions, but these two things came up. Knowing what you know about the current vehicles on the market and that are coming soon, would you pick a Kona again? Would you pick you drive a Kona now?
Yes, I still drive the Kona. Okay. 5.5 years later, I've still got that. Although fabulous. Another myth I missed actually was if it's supposed to chew up tyres, I actually just replaced them last week at 73,000 kilometres. So which is longer than average. And most people, other than Tesla owners, generally replace them around 50,000-ish, which is normal for a car.
Yeah, or less than that if you drive a small SUV like I do. I seem to go through them pretty quickly. So my question was, if you didn't have the Kona now, knowing that you do, would you still pick it again out of the current range of vehicles, or would you trade it in for something else? Do you have a new favourite, I guess, is what I'm asking. That's
a good question. I've actually been thinking about it, because there's a couple of things about my Kona that slightly annoy me. The boot space is a little bit small, and it doesn't have a tow rating, which is super annoying. I bought it under the assurance that they were going to rate it for towing, and then they didn't, which has super annoyed me. The new Kona has a tow rating and actually comes with a bigger boot and a spare tyre. So it is very tempting, although my current Kona was the first new car I ever bought, so I'm not in any hurry to buy another one. But the car that most interests me that I might buy if it turns up here, and there's a good chance, is the Renault 5 E-Tech that's turning up next year, because I like small cars. And it has a 500 kilogram tow rating, so it's not too bad. But it also does vehicle to load, so I can run a campsite or whatever, coffee machine, whatever, from it at about 15 amps. And it'll also do vehicle to grid.
Yeah, wow, okay, because I've been thinking the same thing. I've got lots and lots of solar panels. I feel like the home charging batteries are still kind of priced out. Like they're getting closer, but if I also drove an EV, it would mean that I could use the EV like a home battery and transfer it back and forth, depending on if I need the energy in the house or the car.
Yep.
I really like that idea that it could do both.
I think what will happen is people will generally not plug in their car unless they want to charge, or they really want the power because it's super expensive, or there's been a power failure. So everybody will put in a home battery still, but to be a lot smaller. So you could go away for the weekend and you don't end up with a defrosted fridge if a tree fell across the power lines. But if you did have something that happened in Dandenongs and they lost power for a couple of weeks, you'd have maybe a 3 or 5 kilowatt hour battery at home, and it would charge up from the solar. And then you would drive off during the day and recharge somewhere in the city and bring back your 60, 70 kilowatt hour battery. And then you could run the house overnight, and then the home battery would just do the job while you're away and come back. So you'd have a small battery. So you don't put in the 10, 15 kilowatt hour batteries, and expensive ones, you put in something 3 to 5 kilowatt. So long term, people put in smaller batteries, but they'll still have a home battery, but use the vehicle to home more than vehicle to grid. Because otherwise, vehicle to grid sort of requires you to be plugging in all the time. And that is really annoying. When I went from a low range EV to a long range one with the Kona, the one thing I found really freeing was the fact that I didn't have to plug in every night. So I don't really want the vehicle to grid to plug in every night again.
Yeah, no, that's great. And you actually touched on my second question, which was about towing. One of the reasons that I haven't yet made the transition for myself, even though I'm in sustainability, is because I tow a vintage caravan, and I also, in between, run a bike rack that hosts, 4 or 5 mountain bikes. So I use the tow bar for that quite often, and I hadn't yet seen anything that was going to kind of fit my needs of having 3 super tall young men in my family, and loads of bikes and or a caravan. So I did really like that slide that had the different tow ratings. So I'll go through that. But do you have a favourite?
It depends on what you want for a tow rating. So if you want a ute with a tow rating, the new LDV E-Terra 9, that's 3.5 ton towing.
Yeah, that would be more than enough.
That's most people don't need a car that big, but the Volvos are around. I'm going to cheat here and pretend I know it all.
I thought you were flicking.
Quietly scroll through the list.
Yeah.
The Volvos I know are around 1.6 from memory. The Volvo EX C40 is about 1,500 to 1,800 depending on version, and even the EX30 is 1,600. Teslas are around 1,000.
That would happily see most people with a small towing requirement quite happily. Yeah, great.
Yeah. So most cars, so you'd look for something. Polestars are around 1,600, I think, that type of number. So for a small caravan, vintage caravan would be relatively heavy. So you'd want
they can be
bigger.
Yeah. So there are a couple of questions kicking around in here now. So car stackers in apartment buildings, have they come up with an EV charging solution for the car stackers?
There is. I have seen one advertised. I haven't actually seen it to know how it works. So I believe it exists, but probably Google search it for themselves. So I know that there are 1 or 2 options available. I'm not sure whether they're viable or whether they're a bit clunky. I don't know. But it's not that they don't exist. It's just I haven't seen them to be able to say whether they work well or not.
Yeah, fair call. I mean, it kind of feels like trying to plug your car into a moving elevator, isn't it? That's kind of how, because they're a moving car, aren't they? Those car stackers. I think all the other ones were around contact information and things, and they've all been answered by our lovely crew in the background.
Thank you very much.
So I don't know if you want to leave it for another minute, but I think we're pretty good from a Q&A point of view, which is good because you can now have 20 seconds to kind of swallow and breathe. You've done a lot of talking tonight. Thank you so much for all of that information. I can tell that that's years of learning and researching and testing and driving lots of kilometres in your car.
Yes, I'm about to write my annual article for The Driven, which is the one article I sort of write slightly tongue-in-cheek occasionally, but I sort of summarise the EV market and all the cars I've driven, so I get a lot of test cars, one of which is what the bleat out were they thinking award.
Yes.
There's been some interesting EVs that get released and you're going, why did they bother? One of them was 2 years ago I gave the award to the jointly to the Mazda MX-30 with $67,000 and 200 kilometre range, and Lexus bringing in a new model car with the CHAdeMO DC plug, and they're going, everybody else has dumped it, and yes. Last year I awarded it to Tesla on their own, head and shoulders above everybody else for all the dumb things they did last year. Yeah,
just cause.
Things like taking off the indicator stalk, or just selling cars that people don't actually like. It's very frustrating. They sort of try to make the cars less likable rather than more so. You seem to have you will buy the car that I tell you want to buy.
Yeah. And there's enough people who already have an indicator stalk that don't use it, that we don't need to train a whole new generation of people to not have one and not use it.
Yes.
There was a last minute question from Melody. Should I get an OEM cable or can I get a third party cable? And if I do get a third party cable, what should I look out for?
Basically, I think she means there's cables, either the type 2 to type 2 for the BYO lead charges. Any cable will do. Just if you're buying a 3-phase capable car, make sure that the cable that you buy from an outside manufacturer is a 3-phase one. Some of them are only single phase. So just make sure it is probably get a 22 kilowatt rated one. So that's 3-phase. If you get a 11 kilowatt rated one, it'll only do 16 amps, so 3.5 kilowatts on single phase. So you'd also get caught out.
Yeah, quite slow.
And if you're buying the portable plug-in chargers, again, as long as you buy it from a Australian supplier, they're all fine. Just don't buy it off Alibaba. I was about to say Alibaba. I also just did. Don't buy electrical goods off Alibaba or Fleabay. Because if you bring it in yourself, you're basically the importer, which means if something goes wrong and an insurance company goes back to the importer, you're it. So they go, well, we're going to claim the money off the importer. You're the importer, so we won't pay. But if you buy it off an Australian company, then if all else fails, it goes back to the supplier and they have done their due diligence. And therefore, you would get paid out by the insurance company.
That's good advice. I'm about to wrap us up for the evening, but can I ask one last sneaky personal question? And not really even personal, but also working in sustainability for councils, we're still identifying from a council perspective what our role is in the EV charging networks. And we've got a few different varieties around the place at different community facilities, like you said, libraries and whatnot. They're very well populated. People love using them. But my question is, if we were to put in new infrastructure moving forward, we've done some 22 kilowatt AC chargers and a 25 kilowatt DC charger. Seems like everyone just wants to use a DC charger because it does seem to be that little bit faster. But what would your advice be for people who, might own their own business or someone like it that works in a council that might have the opportunity to put new infrastructure in? What would you suggest we do in that space?
There's two parts of that. If it's a business trying to attract customers, put in, say, a 22 kilowatt charger, because most businesses will have 3-phase and have the room for it. And make it free because it attracts people to come. On the other, make sure it's for your customers. So maybe you get a token or you have to go in and they turn it on for you. For councils, don't make them free. Otherwise, all the locals will spot it. Anyone that they'll just drive around and get their free petrol, effectively, and nobody else that actually needed it will have availability. Whereas if you put a small price on it, be it a parking meter or be it put it through one of the networks and have a 30-cent kilowatt hour charge on or something like that, it means people who needed it, and you could subsidise it a bit, but maybe if it was at 30 cents, it's probably at a similar sort of rate. So homes, so someone that needed it, was an apartment, okay, I don't mind paying that and I need it, but you don't get all the locals across the road going, I'll go get my free petrol instead of paying for it at home. Yeah,
and we have found that lots of locals do enjoy using them. Enjoy them, leaving them overnight, walking home, coming back, and so there is that equity piece around access, which I think is really important. But thank you for answering my question. Look, I'm happy that we've last one. In fact, and then I am actually going to wrap up. John has asked, council policy could also facilitate safe on-street charging for homeowners. And that's sort of a statement and a question. And I am aware from a council perspective that we have sort of an internal working group amongst the different Victorian councils where we're, really doing that deep dive into what's safe, equitable. We're looking at pole-mounted on-street charging, we're looking at all sorts of different options and how we make that work with liability and things like that. You know, obviously not running cords over footpaths.
And a beautiful photo of one of those.
Yeah.
There's multiple options.
Somewhere that does it well?
There's New South Wales is actually doing quite a big trial. So, there's a business here in Victoria that's got one of the contracts to trial their charges on their pole-mounted public ones. Mm-hmm. And there's Port Phillip are trialling the curb charge system, which is basically a system that fits in the curb or just inside the curb and is connected to the person's switchboard. So for people that live in terraces and that type of thing, they have no off-street parking. They're giving permits for that to be installed, and they've somehow sorted out the insurance issues with that. But it's basically a pop-up thing that you just unlock it, lift it up, and then plug in the thing. And it only works when the car's charging. As soon as the car finishes charging, or it's not in use, there's no power to it. So it's perfectly safe.
Yeah, interesting. A bit like a pop-up sprinkler head. Yeah,
a bit like pop-up, except you lift it up. And there are some overseas that actually will automatically come up.
Yeah, right. When it senses that the car's nearby. Or
you wave a card or something over it and it goes zip, and then you plug in. I'm not quite sure how reliable they'll be. I think the curb charge one is simpler and more reliable. It's built like the proverbial brick dunny, and you just lift it up.
And that makes more sense given that in a lot of new estates we don't have power. We don't have power poles. We do have some street lighting. And I do know that the distribution businesses are looking at different smart controls for lighting mechanisms and for EV charging. So I think this is something, John, in answer to your question, yes, council policy will catch up with it, but we're also, the technology is changing so rapidly, and hopefully we get things that we'll see answers to all of those kinds of questions.
In some ways, technology's slightly less a problem because it's a power supply, and that's been around for a long time, and it's still going to be a same size cable for the current, and the socket's settled, so it's just that little interface between the power cable coming in and the plug coming in. It's just that a number of systems have swipe cards or whatever, and they just build back to a central system.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you for answering all of my questions and all of the ones from our participants tonight. I would like to thank you for your time this evening and for your expertise. We've had a dozen or so people sitting in on tonight's session. We've also recorded it so that all of those councils within WAGA can share it and spread the message wide and far and use it as a resource. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you for the opportunity to pass on some information. It's part of what I do is EV education. It's sort of that's where I started really back. I think the first EV presentation I did was in 2010. That was basically all about conversions. It's evolved a bit since then.
Ever so slightly. I think we had a cult. Was it a cult? Oh, rhymes with cult. We had one in council in it was just before I started in 2011. That was a conversion one.
Blade Electron, Hyundai Getz. There were about 50 of those around at that time.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was a very tiny little car. So now we have a fleet of all sorts of different vehicles, and one of we tried a few of the MGs and a few different things, and why can't I remember which one we landed on? The BYDs. We got 3 or 4 BYDs just being at a reasonable price point. Really is.
And they're well put together. Of all the cheaper cars, and I've driven most of them, the Aura, the MG, both MGs, the BYDs. The BYD does stand out as sort of a very well put together car. If you're going for the budget end, the Dolphin and the Seal are both very good choices, and not to put down the Atto 3 either, but it's the Seal and the Dolphin. The Dolphin and the Seal are sort of the next generation again.
Yeah, great. Well, again, thank you. We could keep talking about this all night.
Yes, sorry, everybody.
Sign off because I keep saying we're going to wrap up and we don't. But thank you again, and thanks everyone for joining us tonight. And again, there was lots of information there. We've shared lots of the links to things in the chat. We'll send out emails to the participants where they can find out more information and link in with their local council people from WAGA as required. So, yeah, good night, everybody, and thanks again for joining us.
Yep. And thank you for such a lovely audience and really good questions.
There you go. They did a great job. Thanks, Bryce.
Okay, thank you.